Hey guys, tonight we begin with something easy to overlook and impossibly important. Something quiet, delicate, tucked inside a time and place that history rarely pauses to illuminate. Tonight we go back, way back to medieval Korea, but you're not a noble sipping plum wine or a monk meditating in a silk pavilion. You're a bleary-eyed court scholar, still half dreaming, startled awake by a pounding on your wooden door. It's still dark out. Cold, too. The floor is stone, and your blanket about as thick as last year's rice paper. You grope blindly for your robe's muttering as the banging intensifies. Royal dispatch, the voice insists from behind the door. You open it just enough to see a bundled-up courier soaked in dawn mist, holding out a scroll sealed with crimson lacquer. You don't want to take it. Which of your colleagues has dropped their tasks onto your lap this time? But you do take it and break the seal and scan the opening lines. Ah, another emergency edict about sutra reproduction. Of course it is. Because in this particular year, 1234, give or take, you happen to live in Kaesong, the capital of the Goryeo dynasty. And in case you've forgotten, Kaesong isn't just a sleepy town tucked among pine trees. It's the intellectual beating heart of a kingdom wedged uncomfortably between ambition and annihilation. Outside your window, the palace stirs. Candlelit silhouettes drift through corridors. Courtiers murmur about Mongols. Again, always the Mongols. And you're expected to help accelerate the kingdom's grandest, most frantic publishing project, recopying, recarving, and re-inking vast Buddhist texts before invading armies burn everything down again. No pressure. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always amazing to see which corners of the world we're drifting off from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge down the stone corridor, scroll still in hand, the cold biting through your sleeves. The palace smells faintly of ash and damp ink. You can already hear voices from the scriptorium, older scholars who've been awake for hours, fussing over margins and rubbing charcoal across slabs of woodblock. Sitting at your desk, you're reminded why sleep rarely visits those tasked with making words eternal. Woodblock printing is beautiful, yes, but it's also tedious, backbreaking, and heartbreakingly perishable. One mistake, just one misstroke of a carving knife, and a whole block has to be tossed. Or worse, remade. That takes days. The monk across from you clears his throat and mumbles something about divine intention. You nod, pretending to agree, but mostly you're just wondering if your fingers will ever feel warm again. This is life in the Goryeo court's intellectual underbelly, a daily ballet of calligraphy splinters and bureaucratic panic. And while your name will never appear on the pages you produce, your labor will echo through centuries if, of course, those pages survive the next Mongol raid, which is not a given. Outside, the sun creeps up reluctantly. It filters through lattice windows and lights up dust motes like tiny golden ideograms. You take a sip of cold tea, why is it always cold, and glance at the next pile of scrolls awaiting transcription. Sutra after sutra, word after word, line after line. And here's the thing most people don't realize, while Europe was still copying Bibles by candlelight, your humble little scriptorium was pumping out Buddhist texts by the hundreds, by the thousands, entire libraries of them carved into wood page by wooden page, not for profit, not for politics, but for merit, for salvation, for the eternal safety of the realm. The idea was simple: if exhausting the more sutras you print, the more blessings you generate, especially if you're doing it on behalf of a threatened nation. So you keep printing, keep carving, keep praying. But here's your first reality check. Even with all this frantic productivity, you probably won't survive this job with all your fingers intact, or your sanity. You'll spend your best years hunched over calligraphy brushes, squinting at references and praying you didn't miss a stroke in a verse that could damn someone's afterlife. Still, there's something comforting about the rhythm of it. Brush ink carve, brush ink carve. The temple bells ring softly in the distance, reminding you it's mid-morning, or close enough. You pause to rub your eyes and think just for a moment about how all of this could be faster. You've heard whispers, hints, that somewhere in the palace archives a strange innovation is being discussed. Something metallic, something movable. Historians still argue whether the earliest attempts at metal movable type began during your lifetime or just after. Some point to bronze Buddhist charms that predate the 13th century. Others insist it wasn't until decades later that the casting techniques really matured. But one thing is clear, the need for speed, well-printing speed, was reaching a tipping point. And you groggy scholar of K-Song are caught right at the edge of a revolution you can't even name yet. You return to your inkstone, dip your brush, and begin again. Word after sacred word. The palace bell tolls again, this time, deeper, slower. Maybe it's just marking noon. Maybe it's a subtle warning your fingers should have finished that scroll already. Either way, you don't stop. You press harder with your brush blotting ink onto the parchment, the strokes pulling your mind into the meditative rhythm of repetition. Around you, the scriptorium rustles with activity, a low drone of chanting page turning and brush flicking. But you've trained yourself to tune it out like a monk ignoring flies during meditation. Still, your wrist aches, your back stiffens, and there's only so much tea in the world to keep your brain from soft boiling under the sheer volume of characters you're expected to reproduce. Today you are transcribing parts of the Avatamsaka Sutra, 40 volumes. That's just one text. You glance at the dusty stack of Buddhist canon beside your desk and suppress a small sigh. Goryeo, Korea, your homeland, is a kingdom in love with the written word. And not just any words, holy words, sacred syllables, ink that could theoretically ward off evil summon merit and soothe the collective soul of a nation, constantly under threat from the north. For the record, no one's ever printed more religious texts by hand than Goryeo, Korea, not China, not Japan, not even India, birthplace of the Buddha himself. You head to the library annex to retrieve another volume and pause in the corridor where the walls are lined with wooden printing blocks. Entire racks of them stacked from floor to ceiling like a wooden forest of frozen prayers. They smell like pine resin ink in quiet panic. Each block holds 2 pages worth of characters. Some are over a foot long, carved in reversed relief, so they can be inked and pressed onto mulberry paper. You run your fingers along the grooves so precise, so painstaking. One slip of the chisel and the entire piece has to be redone. Here's the wild part: to create a complete Buddhist canon, using woodblock printing, you need tens of thousands of these. And that's exactly what your kingdom decides to do. Back in 1011, long before you were born, the Goryeo court began carving its first complete Tripitaka, a comprehensive collection of Buddhist scriptures. It took decades, thousands of artisans, and an incalculable amount of wood ink and divine patience. But by 1087, the project was done. All 6,000 volumes carved, printed and proudly stored in temple archives. Then came the Mongols. They invaded. They burned. And just like that, centuries of carved prayer went up in smoke. So here you are in the early 1200s doing it all over again. The second edition, known as the Tripitaka Koreana, will eventually become one of the most extraordinary printing feats in all of history. Carved with surgical precision, it contains over 52 million characters, and not a single known error. Scholars still argue how they pulled it off. Some suggest there was a secret system for proofreading. Others point to a monk named Tsugi who might have personally overseen thousands of blocks, with a brain like a calculator and the patience of a bodhisattva. And yet, despite the magnificence of this second printing effort, you and many others are starting to notice its fundamental flaw: it's still vulnerable. Fire, water, termites, war. All it takes is one disaster and poof, 20 years of work disappear like incense smoke in a drafty shrine. So you begin to daydream. Not about sleep, that's long gone, but about innovation. What if instead of carving each page into a block of wood, you could rearrange smaller pieces? One character per tile. Swappable. Reusable. You've heard of such things. Rumors from the continent. The Chinese tried it ceramic movable type, but the tiles chipped the ink smudged, and everyone went back to carving wood within a generation. And yet, in the Goryeo court, your kingdom might just have the resources, the metallurgists, the bureaucratic desperation to try again. only better. Metal. That's the idea of flickering behind the eyes of certain high-ranking officials. Metal won't warp, it won't burn as easily. It won't split from humidity or bore worms. And if the characters are cast well, you could, in theory, assemble whole pages like puzzles and reprint them quickly. But that's a whisper, not a reality. For now, you return to the temple library and stack another load of pages in your arms. You nod to a younger monk carving quietly at a window. His fingers are stained with ink and resin. His expression is serene in that annoying way only monks can manage. You envy him a little. Back at your desk, the world outside grows colder. Kaesong's winter always creeps in through the cracks. You dip your brush again. The ink freezes slightly. You sigh again. In your notes, you scribble a strange little idea, metal letters interchangeable. It won't go anywhere. Not today. Not with the Mongols threatening again. But it's there, tucked in your margins like a footnote to something that hasn't happened yet. Later, historians will call this moment transitional. As if you all knew you were standing between wood and metal, between tradition and revolution. But of course you don't know that. You're just trying to stay awake long enough to finish your verse without ruining the scroll. Somewhere a bell rings for evening tea. You brush the ink from your sleeve and shuffle out with the other scholars trailing into the courtyard beneath a sky that smells faintly of pine smoke and frost. The world feels quiet even as history begins to stir beneath your ink-stained hands. Evening settles like old silk over Kaesong. The courtyard stones are cold under your feet, and the sky above has turned a pale violet streaked with clouds the color of soot. You cradle your warm tea bowl in both hands like it holds the last ember of the sun. Around you, other scholars sip silently. Some look contemplative, some just look tired. Everyone is ink-stained. You glance toward the horizon where the silhouettes of temples and government halls dissolve into the shadows. Tomorrow you'll return to your carving. But tonight, just for a moment, you can let yourself wonder, is there a better way? You've seen how fragile woodblocks are. Worms bore into them, fire consumes them, and even if they survive all that, they warp with humidity or crack from age. The carving takes weeks, the printing takes days, and the result, however beautiful, is still just paper waiting for rain or war or both. Now imagine this: instead of carving entire pages into single wooden slabs, you mold each individual character in bronze. One tile for each syllable. Hundreds, maybe thousands of tiny reusable letters. Print a page, reset the tiles, print the next. A movable puzzle of sound and thought. It's audacious, it's tedious, it might not even work, but it's exactly what someone just a few decades from now will try to do. That someone is Choe Yun-wee, a bureaucrat, not a monk. Not a monk-turned-scientist. Just a man sick of splinters and delays. He lives in a time not too far from yours, and he's gonna take this blurry, borderline blasphemous idea, printing with cast metal type, and actually make it real. Historians still argue whether Chui truly invented the technique or simply refined something older. There are whispers of Chinese experiments with porcelain or wooden type, and even rumors of earlier Korean tinkering that never quite caught on. But Cho's contribution is different. It's methodical, it's replicable, it's bronze, and it's born not from idealism but from paperwork. You see, Choe isn't printing sutras, he's printing law books. Imagine that. All this craftsmanship, not for poetry or prayer, but for procedures, court rulings, and bureaucratic updates that make even the monks snore. But that's the genius of it. Religious texts are sacred. They require perfect aesthetics, reverence, calligraphic flourishes. Legal documents, they just need to be legible and fast. So Choe experiments. First, the characters. Each one must be carved in reverse on a wax model. No small task when you're working with an entire syllabary of classical Chinese. Then the molds. Wax models are packed in fine sand or clay. Bronze is melted and poured into the molds, replacing the wax with gleaming permanence. This part gets tricky. Too hot and the characters warp. Too cool and the molds don't fill. There are rumors that one of Choi's early attempts exploded and took out part of a storage shed. You weren't there, but you wouldn't be surprised. Eventually, though, the type starts to emerge rows upon rows of tiny bronze letters, each one sharp, clear, and nearly indestructible. But casting is only step one. Next comes layout. The characters are arranged on an iron plate smeared with wax to hold them in place. They're inked, pressed to paper, then disassembled and reused. Repeat. And repeat. And repeat. The process isn't perfect. The ink doesn't always transfer evenly. Characters shift if the wax softens. And some types get lost or chipped during cleanup. One time a scribe's sandal melted slightly from standing too close to the furnace. You try not to laugh. Still it works. By 1234, the same year you were handed that panicked edict, Choe Yun-wi is already producing full printed volumes using cast metal type. One of them, a governmental compendium called Sangjong Gogum Yamun, something like model rituals of the past and present. Catchy, right? You don't get a copy. No one in your scriptorium does. These books are for nobles, for officials, for the well-connected, and then oddly, they vanish. Not literally, but almost. You hear about them. You see mention in old records. But the physical books, gone, destroyed, misplaced, or maybe just deemed too unremarkable to preserve. It's a strange twist. The first known use of metal, movable type in the entire world, predating Gutenberg by nearly 2 generations, and nobody remembers it. Well, almost nobody. You're back at your desk, start doodling again in the margins. You sketch a tiny mold. You list potential alloys. Tin, lead, bronze. You scribbled a Chinese character for knowledge. And imagine holding it in your palm, forged in fire. That night, by the light of a flickering oil lamp, you dream of a future where pages are assembled like puzzle tiles printed in minutes, bound in hours and read across kingdoms. You dream of a world that forgets you dreamed it. By the time morning drapes itself over Kaesong again, your joints feel rusted. You stretch, but the cracking of your spine is louder than the temple bell. Another day, another scroll. But something has shifted barely noticeable, like a draft under a paper screen. It's not just your back that aches. It's the sense that everything you're doing, all this chisel and ink devotion, might be outdated. You try to ignore the thought. The monk beside you hums softly as he dips his brush. The scriptorium smells like pine dust and fermented ink. Outside, a cart rattles by stacked with fresh mulberry paper. Business as usual, and yet the whispers persist. You've now heard from 2 couriers both out of breath and annoyingly cryptic that metal blocks are being tested at a government office near Seogyeong. You weren't supposed to hear that, but you did. And now it gnaws at you. You focus on your scroll. The sutra you're copying is about impermanence. Fitting. Still, your curiosity grows. You finish your quota for the morning, excuse yourself with a vague excuse about checking rubbings for errors, and head out robes, fluttering sandals, slapping softly on stone. The roads are muddy as always. The city breathes in puffs of charcoal smoke and murmurs in 10,000 dialects. Kaesong may be the capital, but it's anything but polished. Pigs sleep in alleyways. Courtiers spit in lotus ponds. Students quote Confucius while chewing garlic. It's a city of contradictions. You reach the document bureau just after midday. No guards stop you. That's the thing about being a low-ranking scholar. Everyone assumes you belong, or you're not worth the trouble. Inside the room is strangely quiet. Not scriptorium quiet machine quiet, focused, intent. You step forward and see it. A tray, an inky surface, and on it neat rows of metal characters glinting like tiny mirrors in the light. You've seen carved wood, you've seen bamboo slips, you've even seen etched stone, but you've never seen letters like these. One of the scribes, young nervous, explains in a whisper how it works. Each bronze tile is a single Chinese character cast individually in molds, arranged on a shallow plate coated in beeswax. Once positioned, they're inked, and a sheet is pressed on top, using a heavy wooden block. The pressure transfers the ink. The result, a perfectly legible page. Fast. Reusable. Your mind reels. There's a rumor again whispered that Jikji, a Zen Buddhist text, has already been printed this way in a monastery in Hyungdeok. You file the name away. Jikji. You haven't seen it. Almost no one has. But it exists. Here's what makes it weirder: no one seems all that excited. You ask the scribe why they're not shouting this from temple roofs. Why aren't scholars demanding a demonstration? Why aren't the streets clogged with booksellers? He shrugs. It's complicated. You press further, and the story emerges like ink bleeding through old cloth. It's expensive. Casting each character takes time, and bronze isn't cheap. There are thousands of ideograms to make. Lose a few, good luck reprinting. Misplace one, and you're stuck. And the layout nightmare fuel. The beeswax melts in summer. Characters slip if someone sneezes. One misaligned row, and an entire page becomes gibberish. Compared to a carved woodblock, which once perfected can be reused endlessly, metal type is fussy. Tedious. Historians still argue whether this fussiness was real or exaggerated. Some say the court was simply too conservative to adopt such a radical shift. Others think metal printing was quietly encouraged, just never scaled. And some believe the real problem was cultural, that the art of printing had to look a certain way, elegant, reverent, flowing. Metal by comparison was blunt, blocky, ugly. You lean in to examine a line of printed type. It is blocky. Crisp, yes, but also cold. Functional. There's no brush flourish. No soul, some might say. And that may have been enough to doom it. The scribe hands you a sample page. You run your fingers across the surface. The paper's still damp, the ink rich. You read the characters, a fragment of a government code, something about tax levies in mountainous provinces. It's not beautiful, but it's fast. You leave the office with your mind on fire. You don't speak on the way back. You barely notice the rain starting to fall. Back at your scriptorium, your fellow scholars are still carving away, muttering about stroke order and blade dullness. You look at their work and feel something odd respect, tinged with irrelevance. You sit, ink your brush, and return to your sutra. But you're thinking about that tray, those tiles, that quiet little revolution tucked away in a dusty, bureaucratic room. Printing, you realize, is no longer about monks and manuscripts. It's about information controlling it, reproducing it, speeding it up, and just maybe forgetting where it started. Evening falls again, but this time it brings more than ink stains and back pain. It brings questions, big ones. You sit under the crooked pine tree near the temple library, absently picking at the threads of your sleeve while your brain loops the same thought. If we have metal type now, why are we still carving wood? You don't ask anyone aloud. You've been around long enough to know that kind of question is both unwelcome and unwise. But it nags. And so over the next few days, you start paying attention not to the scrolls you're copying, but to the scrolls everyone else is ignoring. Turns out those whispers you overheard were just the surface of something deeper. You sneak into the palace records room one cold morning before sunrise, because of course you do, and start leafing through dispatches, inventory logs, scribbled memos. And there it is, mention after mention of experimental metal types, limited editions, provisional projects, always cautious language, always buried in paragraphs of bureaucratic padding. One name keeps popping up: Hyungdeok Temple. You've never been there, but the more you read, the clearer it becomes. Something special happened in that quiet place. Not just bureaucratic printing, religious printing. The kind that mattered. The kind that people usually reserved for the slow, sacred hands of scribes. And the text, Jikji, that name again. This time it's not just a footnote. It's bolded, underlined, stamped with the seal of a high-ranking monk. And the date of 1377 jumps out at you. That's nearly 80 years before Gutenberg prints his famous Bible. Now your heart's doing strange things. You should be asleep. You're not. You're pacing between shelves with scrolls rustling in your robe sleeves, realizing that your quiet little kingdom might have done something first, something world-shifting, and then just dropped it. You slip out before sunrise, before anyone notices, and make your way toward the temple. The journey takes 2 days on foot. You pass rice paddies frozen in early winter silence, villages that smell like miso and smoke. A boy waves at you from a stone bridge, a dog barks behind a clay wall, and a woman sells fermented turnips from a barrel near the roadside shrine. You sleep in a barn. You dream of letters made of fire. When you reach Hungdeok Temple, the mountain air bites your cheeks. The buildings are simple weathered but peaceful. And there in the main hall, guarded by no one but a dozing cat, you find it. Jixi, well, part of it. A few surviving pages, browned with age, corners curled, but unmistakably metal printed. The text is clear, mechanical, repetitive in a way no brush could achieve. It's not flashy, it doesn't sing, but it speaks. And the voice it uses is faster, more practical, more ambitious than anything carved in wood. The monk who greets you is old, his eyes crinkle when he smiles, and he walks with the pace of a story unspooling. You ask about the type. He shrugs, a useful thing he says, but hard to keep alive. He tells you what you already suspect: metal type was expensive. It needed specialists, casters, smelters, layout designers. It required coordination and planning and careful storage. Wood blocks easier, familiar, easier to repair, more aesthetically Korean, whatever that means. Historians still argue whether the decline of metal printing was due to logistics tradition or just plain old inertia. Some say the conservative scholar officials resisted it, worried it would cheapen sacred texts. Others think it was a class issue. Printing with metal looked like mass production. Mass production looked like trade. And trade was messy. The monk pours you barley tea. It tastes faintly like roasted secrets. You sip quietly and wonder how something so monumental could go so quietly into the night. Not banned, not buried, just overlooked. Outside, a crow calls from the pine. You walk the temple garden. You feel the weight of your discovery, but also its fragility. There's no museum waiting to enshrine this moment. No brass plaque, no marble pedestal. Just tea, ink, mountains, and you have a printed book that no one remembers to mention. You ask the monk if he thinks metal printing will come back. He thinks for a while. It may, he says, but not here, not now. You nod even though you don't quite understand. You thank him. You bow. And as you walk back down the mountain, your satchel carries not a relic, but a realization. Sometimes being first doesn't matter. Sometimes being remembered does. You are back in Kaesong. Your sandals are mud-caked. Your robes are wrinkled, and your mind absolutely tangled. You've just stood in the presence of something world-changing, a printed book, made with metal, movable type decades before the rest of the planet even thought to try it. And yet no one in the city seems to care. At the scriptorium, nothing has changed. Monks still carve characters with careful reverence. Couriers still rush in with imperial scrolls tied in too many ribbons. Even your colleagues still debate whether a certain stroke should curve slightly more to the left. You want to scream, but instead you just quietly take your seat, unroll a fresh scroll, and pretend the world hasn't tilted under your ink-stained feet. The truth is, the more you look, the more it makes sense that Korea invented metal printing, and the more it makes sense that Korea didn't keep it. Here's the thing, invention doesn't always mean adoption. You know that now. And in Goryeo, where society runs on rituals, hierarchy, and aesthetics change, especially technological change moves with the enthusiasm of a sleepy ox. Consider this: Goryeo woodblock printing is not just a method, it's an art, a spiritual practice. Every block is a devotional object. Even the process of carving the slow tracing of each character is considered a kind of meditation. You're not just making books, you're channeling the divine. So when someone shows up with a tray full of metal tiles and says, "Hey, we can do this faster," it doesn't land as innovation. It lands as irreverence. Printing to the scholar official class isn't supposed to be efficient. It's supposed to be elegant. And then there's cost. Always cost. Let's say you want to print a single Buddhist sutra using metal type. You need a full set of characters, often 20 plus unique types. skilled metallurgists who can cast those types without distortion, a stable space to store the type, clean it, and keep it organized. Wax trays, iron plates, ink specialists, and press workers. Compare that to carving one woodblock and using it for the next 2 decades. Suddenly, speed feels expensive. And don't forget social optics. You're a royal official, which looks better to the king. A book you spent 6 months lovingly carving by hand, or a book you stamped out with machine parts. Exactly. Historians still argue whether Goryeo elites actively resisted metal type or just passively ignored it. Some scholars say the real issue was a lack of infrastructure to support mass production. Others think the metal was quietly reserved for specific private projects like legal codes or internal government manuals, not public religious printing. Whatever the reason, you notice something strange in the weeks after your return. No one talks about Jigji. Not the monks, not the courtiers, not even the scholars who definitely know it exists. It's like the book is there and not there. Real but irrelevant. You go back to your scrolls. You copy verses that promise salvation, longevity, good harvests, protection from invaders. You carve ink into paper so thin you can see the fibers twist beneath your brush. And all the while, you wonder what happens when a culture chooses beauty over efficiency. There's no right answer. In China, printing took root as both art and business. In Europe, Gutenberg's press will one day launch a revolution. In Korea, metal type will flicker to life, sputter, and quietly dim. Not because it wasn't brilliant, but because brilliance alone doesn't change systems. And yet you find that comforting somehow. There's a kind of quiet dignity in a society that says, we see your innovation, but we prefer to chant while we carve. It's inefficient, it's impractical, but it's theirs. A few weeks later, a new edict arrives. More sutras to be copied. 1,000 pages, give or take. The king has decided that blessings must be earned the slow way this season. You don't groan, you don't protest, you just warm your inkstone, straighten your back, and begin. Brush, ink, carve, breathe, repeat. As you dip your brush, you think of the metal tiles, the smell of molten bronze, the quiet monk with the barley tea, and the book no one mentions. You think of all the forgotten firsts. You wonder how many others history never wrote down. There's a phrase your fellow scholars like to mutter when a scroll tears or a carving smudges. Ink fades, but memory holds. You used to nod along. Lately, though, it feels more like a punchline than a proverb. Because if memory really held, wouldn't people remember Jikji? Wouldn't they be lining up to see metal printing in action, to praise its foresight, to teach it in the palace academies? Instead, Jikji exists like a secret. Real but unused, revered but ignored. You start noticing the silence everywhere. In the court libraries, no metal-type editions are requested. In the temple schools, novice monks are still learning to carve wood blocks, not cast molds. Even the university scholars who love footnotes and trivia don't discuss it. It's as if someone opened a window into the future, and everyone agreed to shut it again. One afternoon, you pass an old friend in the marketplace. He's a paper seller now retired from court life, and over a cup of bitter root tea, he tells you a story that explains everything and nothing. Back when he worked in the Bureau of Records, he says there was a brief moment, just a few seasons, when the metal press project almost gained traction. Officials requested funding. Demonstrations were held. The king's advisors nodded thoughtfully. And then, nothing. Budgets shifted, priorities changed, a border skirmish erupted, a new high priest disliked the aesthetic, and the project faded. Not with a scandal, not with sabotage, just with indifference. Too fast for the old guard, he says, licking his thumb and flipping a paper scrap. Too slow for the new one. Historians still argue whether this quiet death was deliberate or accidental. Some claim a faction of scholars saw metal type as a threat to their social status. After all, if anyone could print books, who needed elites to guard knowledge? Others point to the broader geopolitical landscape, Mongol pressure resource, scarcity, dynastic upheaval. It wasn't a good time to reinvent anything. You walk home in silence, the wind tugging at your sleeves. And as you round the bend near the bridge, you catch sight of something that stops you cold. A small bookstall, tucked under a faded red awning. The usual Ware's fortune scrolls, hand-copied poems, cheap reproductions of Confucian texts. But there, almost hidden, is a page printed in metal type. Your pulse stutters. It's not Jigji, it's something else. A civil code, perhaps. The characters are sharp, rigid, lacking elegance, but they're unmistakably printed, not brushed, not stamped, not carved. The stallkeeper shrugs when you ask. Got it in Seogyeong, she says. Some clerk was using them for test runs before the budget got pulled. You ask if you can buy it. She looks surprised. You want that, it's ugly. You nod. She wraps it in paper, and for a few coins you walk away with what might be one of the rarest books in the capital simply because no one wants it. Back in your quarters, you lay it beside your hand-copied sutra. Side by side, two worlds, one sacred, one practical. One born of devotion, the other of design. It's not a choice between right and wrong. It's a choice between rhythm and rupture. Brush, ink, carve. That's rhythm, that's history. Type, cast, press. That's rupture, that's future. But Goryeo Korea is a land that prefers rhythm, and so the metal press waits. Not forgotten entirely, but folded away like an off-key note in a scroll of music everyone already knows by heart. You tuck the printed page between two floorboards, safe from damp and moths, and go to sleep that night wondering how many other revolutions have curled up like that quiet, lonely, waiting for a century that might finally be ready to listen. By now, the scroll you've been copying for weeks has grown soft at the edges. The ink has soaked in and dried layer after careful layer until the text glows faintly like charcoal under the lamplight. You run your fingers along the latest line and smile without meaning to. There's something deeply satisfying about how it all looks. The curvature, the flow, the tiny margin notes in your own messy hand. And yet, the metal page under your floorboard won't stop whispering to you. You've started visiting it in secret. After evening meals, while the others file off for prayer or sleep, you slip back to your room, lift the floorboard, and study the stamped characters by candlelight. There's no incense here, no ritual, just ink and bronze, and the absurd thought that this is how the world might be one day, quick, precise, repeatable. You wonder what the monk at Hungdeok would think if he saw you crouched like a thief over an outdated technology, or what Choi Yun-wei might say if he could see how little has changed since his breakthrough, or more likely, how little people cared. Historians still argue whether Jikji was intended to be the start of a revolution or simply an experiment with no long-term plan. Some claim it was a prototype, a proof of concept. Others believe it was the tail end of a quiet printing tradition that predated it entirely, now lost to time. No records, no successors, just a flicker of innovation swallowed by tradition. You keep reading. The metal-printed civil code isn't poetic. It's dry. Lists of titles, responsibilities, protocols. What to do when a tax official falls ill. How many oxen can be claimed from a flood-ravaged province. Important maybe, but dull. And yet there's something beautiful about that dullness. This isn't a book for the gods. It's for people. Bureaucrats, farmers, record keepers, those who don't have time to carve each syllable into pine. People who need paper now, not next month. People who might lose everything if that document arrives a day too late. You think back to your first morning with the edict scroll. The urgent footsteps. The cracked wax. The sense that history was breathing down your neck. What if that message had come late? What if the monk had died before the next sutra was ready? What if the knowledge you held in your hands could have saved someone, but only if it traveled faster? These are not questions your elders want you to ask, but you're asking them anyway. You begin writing notes. Not scrolls, not sutras, just thoughts. Lists of characters most often used, sketches of a more efficient layout tray, calculations of how many lines could fit on a single wax sheet without smudging. It's speculative, it's amateur, but it's yours. One day a fellow scribe notices your scribbles. What's this, he asks, lifting a page covered in diagrams. You freeze. Nothing you say a little too fast. He laughs, crumples the paper, tosses it toward the brazier. It misses. You retrieve it quietly when he's gone. Later that night, as the city sleeps and the lanterns outside flicker like distant stars, you press your fingers into the grooves of the metal page again. You wonder how many other hands have done the same. Not with reverence, but with curiosity, with intent. Kaesong is not a city that rushes, and maybe that's the point. Maybe this invention was never meant to flourish here in a culture so bound to the brushstroke. Maybe it's a seed meant for foreign soil. You don't know it yet, but centuries later, European presses will roll out books by the millions. School children will be taught that a man named Gutenberg invented it all. And your quiet kingdom will be left out of the story. But you were here. You saw the future hidden in bronze tiles and ignored scrolls. You saw a truth that memory doesn't always fade because of time. Sometimes it fades because we choose what we're ready to remember, and sometimes we're not. The next time you visit the palace archives, it's under the guise of fetching old census records. Harmless, boring, the sort of task that guarantees no one will follow you. You've become good at this, slipping between shelves, like a shadow, nodding respectfully to gatekeepers who don't really remember your name. You're not looking for anything in particular. Not today. You're hoping to stumble into something, and that's how it happens. Tucked between a ledger on rice taxes and a treatise on river dike maintenance, you find a scroll titled simply, Inventory of Metal Type. It's short, precise, almost dry enough to ignore. But your heart thumps as you read. There it is in ink proof that the palace ordered the creation of 2 full sets of cast metal characters. Not just once, multiple times. There are notes about weight, alloy ratios, even payment logs for the casters who worked with molten bronze just outside the city's western gate. But what's missing, where the record should continue detailing use projects, printing runs, there's nothing. No follow-up orders, no expansion logs, no reprints. Just a single line. Sets retired to treasury for safekeeping. Retired. You stare at the phrase. It sounds more like exile. Historians still argue over what this entry really means. Did the treasury guard the types as relics? Did a later official decide to preserve them instead of use them? Or were they simply locked away and forgotten one more brilliant thing that didn't fit the rhythm of the time? You close the scroll, gently feeling the ache of something unfinished. And suddenly, a question crystallizes in your mind. What if the reason no one remembers Korea's printing press is because someone chose to forget it? You think back to the monk at Hungduk Temple sipping barley tea and shrugging about how hard it is to keep such things alive. Maybe he wasn't just talking about logistics. Maybe he meant permission. Cultural permission, institutional permission. Because no invention, no matter how brilliant, survives in a world that's not ready to hold it. And Goryeo, for all its wisdom, was still a world of hierarchy, ritual, beauty, and control. Movable type, on the other hand, that was unpredictable, practical, ungraceful, and worst of all, accessible. You leave the archives just as the sun dips behind the city's west wall. The rooftops glow like lacquered wood. The sound of distant drums marks the hour. The guard's switch shifts. Kaesong exhales. As you walk, you notice the shops are still selling hand-copied poems. Monks still chant over brush-written charms. Children still practice calligraphy on dusty slates. None of them know. None of them need to. You pass by the bookstall from weeks before the one with the metal-printed civil code. It's gone now. Replaced by a tray of woodblock charms and poems about pine trees. You ask the seller what happened to the old book. She shrugs. Didn't sell. Maybe I used the paper to wrap garlic. You want to laugh. You almost do. Then you buy a charm you don't need just to be polite. Back in your quarters, you take out your hidden notes, your sketches, your character lists, your diagrams, and you fold them tighter. You tuck them under the floorboard next to the printed page. You don't know what will become of them. You just know you can't burn them. Not yet. Winter tightens around Kaesong like a slow closing book. The days shrink, the lamps burn longer, and your breath turns visible, even inside stone walls. Still the scrolls arrive. Still the ink flows. Still the rituals continue unchanged, unbothered. You've learned to work with gloves. You slice the tips off the fingers so you can feel the brush. Your knuckles ache like ancestral ghosts. But the lines stay straight. The strokes stay balanced. That part of you still belongs to this era. The other part, well, it lingers near the floorboards. You now visit the hidden metal printed page once a week. Not to study it, just to hold it. Feel the ridges. Remind yourself that it happened, that it was real, that it was here. Sometimes you wonder if that's why people forgot because no one knew what to do with it. You don't light candles for it. You don't chant over it. You don't carve it reverently into lacquered pine. You just press it and move on. It's so unceremonious it feels heretical, but that's what makes it powerful. You begin to notice how woodblocks age. The temple's older ones are warped at the corners. Insects have left tiny trails in their sides. The carved grooves are softening like the faces of old monks. And when you press them onto paper, the characters come out faded, jagged. A memory of clarity, not clarity itself. You ask a senior monk how often they recarve blocks. He scoffs. When we have time, or when they crumble. But the meaning becomes unclear, you point out. He shrugs. Truth isn't always clear. It's a clever answer. It's also maddening, because the metal type didn't fade. Its print after all these years is still crisp. It's still legible. Even now, even unloved, it works. You find yourself watching the court printers with new eyes. They still use woodblocks, still chant the same verses as they brush ink over the raised text. But now you see it differently, not just as tradition, but as resistance. Not to technology, but to loss. Maybe that's why they cling to it. A woodblock has soul. It bears the marks of the carver. It remembers the hands that shaped it. Printing with type. That's clean, precise, efficient, but soulless. Or is it? Historians still argue about this. Some say the aversion to movable metal type wasn't fear of speed. It was fear of losing the human trace, of removing the artist from the art. But maybe you think we just haven't learned to see soul in different shapes yet. You start testing the idea, on your own, in secret. You gather scraps of beeswax, bits of ink. You carve a single character into clay, then press it into the wax, forming a mold. You melt a coin over a brazier, just enough heat to liquefy, not vaporize. You pour it in. The result is rough, lopsided, ugly. You try again, and again. By your fourth attempt, the character is still crooked, but it's recognizable. Your first piece of self-made type. It gleams in the lamplight like a secret badge of rebellion. You don't dare use it, but you keep it wrapped in cloth, hidden beside your notes. It smells faintly like smoke and brass, like something from the future pretending to be from the past. You walk through the palace with this tiny artifact pressed to your chest, and no one knows. They pass you, nod politely, discuss quotas, cite Confucius. And you, keeper of a future that no one asked for, say nothing. That night, as you lie on your mat, the wind hisses at the window frame, and the ink on your fingers has dried into little spider webs. You close your eyes and picture not calligraphy, but machinery. Not monks chanting, but pages flying out one after another. Clean, crisp, cold, fast. Is it loss? Is it progress? Or is it just change? You don't have answers, but you're starting to understand the question. Spring arrives quietly in Kaesong, not with fanfare, but with the gradual return of birdsong and the thaw of inkstones left too long by the window. The wind smells faintly of plum blossoms now. The monks begin to air out their scrolls. And you're still printing secrets in your room. Your little collection of metal characters has grown. You've made 7 now, each painstakingly cast, using melted coins and hand-shaped clay molds. They're clumsy, slightly misaligned, but there's a strange pride in their imperfection. You've even begun testing them. Not for sutras, of course, that would border on sacrilege, but for mundane things, your name a date, a proverb about spring winds and restless minds. You ink the tiles, press them gently onto scrap paper, and marvel at the result. It's never quite perfect. The spacing wobbles, the ink pools oddly, but it works. The sound it makes when you press the paper, a soft thump, has become your new favorite music. And still no one knows. You've gotten good at secrecy. Good at blending in. Your colleagues still see you as the same dutiful scribe who debates brush angles and recites Confucian aphorisms on cue. No one suspects you're dabbling in lost technology beneath your floorboards. But one day something unexpected happens. You're summoned. Not by your scriptorium supervisor, not by a monk, but by a minor court official whose name you barely recognize. His message is polite, vague. Please bring your current projects to the Hall of Ritual Texts for review. You go, of course. You bow. You enter the dark, echoing hall with its high ceilings and rows of carved dragons coiled along the beams. And there, waiting by the window with a lacquered tea set and an unreadable expression, is someone you do recognize, Lord Kim Yoo-jung, a senior scholar, head of the Archive Council, whispered to be one of the king's most trusted advisors on cultural affairs. He invites you to sit, pours the tea himself, and then says something that makes your blood still. You've been making letters. You don't speak. You don't blink. He takes a sip, metal ones. Still, you say nothing. 1,000 thoughts crash into each other behind your eyes. He chuckles softly. Relax. I'm not here to punish you. I'm here because I was once as curious as you are. He reaches into his sleeve and pulls out a square of folded cloth. Inside it, a single metal character. Virtue. Beautifully cast. Ancient. Worn at the corners. I made this when I was 19, he says. I still remember the mold collapsing. Burned my wrist. My mentor made me chant repentance verses for a month. You finally speak. Why did you stop? He doesn't answer right away. Just looks out the window at the plum blossoms trembling in the breeze. Because it didn't matter, he says. No one wanted faster. They wanted familiar. Historians still debate whether there was a quiet society of court intellectuals who experimented with movable type behind closed doors, men like Lord Kim, who saw the promise and also the futility of chasing change in a world addicted to tradition. Now you wonder how many other floorboards hide typesets. How many other scribes carry secrets like yours? You ask, so why call me here? He smiles. Because it's spring, and things hidden too long begin to rot. He hands you a scroll sealed, stamped heavy. This, he says, is a commission. Small. Internal. A set of court edicts to be printed quickly, discreetly, and without the usual ceremonial nonsense. You look up. He interrupts. You will use your type. Carefully, privately. No temples, no monks. Just the work. You hold the scroll like it might vanish. Your heart is pounding so loud you're afraid it's echoing through the rafters. Why me, you ask? Lord Kim shrugs. Because you were foolish enough to try, and skilled enough not to fail. That night, back in your room, you place the scroll beside your handmade letters and sit silently for hours. Something has changed. Not loudly, not with applause. Just a single page torn from obscurity, and now handed back to you. To finish, you don't sleep that night. The commission scroll sits unopened on your desk. Its red seal still intact, the paper still uncreased. But its weight feels immense, like it knows it's about to decide the shape of your future. Maybe even the shape of forgotten history. At dawn, you finally break the seal. Inside, 12 short court edicts, each no longer than a few lines. Routine matters, grain redistribution after winter floods, tax remissions in southern provinces, adjustments to minor clerical appointments. Nothing dramatic, nothing sacred, but that's the point. These are documents meant to move fast. No brush calligraphy, no court ritual, just ink paper and urgency. You read the last line carefully. Deliver 40 printed copies within 7 days. Method at your discretion. At your discretion. That phrase unspools something inside you. Permission. Not just to do, but to decide. You never thought you'd see those words in an official decree. You spend the morning assessing what you have. 7 cast characters, barely a dent in what you'll need. The edicts are written in classical Chinese using several hundred unique characters across the set. Even with repetition, you estimate at least 200 need to be forged to complete the task. It's madness, but it's also real. You begin. You no longer hide what you're doing, not exactly. You work in the disused back storeroom of the scriptorium where the ink fumes are too strong for most, and the floorboards creak too much for meditation. It's the perfect place to vanish. You reuse the molds you can. For others, you shape new ones from compacted ash and clay. You melt bronze from old belt buckles and damaged fittings. Every hiss of metal into mold is a prayer. Every cast is a gamble. One warps, one sticks, one explodes into a fine mist of hot regret. You burn your thumb, you curse silently, but slowly the tray begins to fill. You arrange the finished characters on a lacquered board lined with beeswax. You press them carefully into place with tweezers and fingernails. Then you ink them thick black even and place the first sheet. It works, not perfectly. One character bleeds slightly. One corner lifts, but it's readable. The lines are there. The future is legible. You print 3 more, the spacing improves, the ink behaves. By the 10th copy, it looks official. By the 30th, it looks effortless. And then on the 7th day, you carry 40 printed edicts, stacked, tied with hemp string pressed between bamboo boards up the long corridor toward the hall of ritual texts. Your knees shake, your palms sweat, your heart is a drum. You expect questions, inspections, a quiet room full of skeptical elders ready to mutter about line weight and lost brush spirit. Instead, there's only a clerk. He takes the bundle, he weighs it briefly, then he stamps it. Approved. That's it. He doesn't even look up. You walk back through the palace with the surreal calm of someone who just sprinted through a battlefield and didn't get hit. That night, you sit beside your tray of characters now cleaned and return to their compartment boxes. You touch each one, gently, like relics, not because they're sacred, but because they've been something. They've done something. Historians still debate how many early Korean metal-type projects were completed in secret, like this short run's bureaucratic orders, unceremonious and undocumented. But they all agree on one thing: most were never archived, never studied, never mentioned in annals, which means they vanished, like yours likely will. But that's okay. You didn't do it for legacy. You did it because it worked. In the days that follow, nothing changes. No scholars come running, no policy shifts, no triumphant bronze casting ceremonies. But Lord Kim passes you in the corridor and nods once. That's all. And in your quarters, you cast one more character before packing everything away. Silence. Because that's what history often wraps itself in. Not noise, not fireworks, just metal, ink, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing you were there. You'd expect to feel triumphant. After all, you just printed 40 official edicts, using a method most of the kingdom doesn't even know exists. You beat the deadline. You didn't burn down the scriptorium. And for the first time since you dipped your brush into ink, someone in authority, real authority, recognized your work. So why does it feel like nothing happened? The world, it turns out, does not pivot easily. K-song continues to hum along in its usual rhythm bells, tolling monks, chanting scribes, murmuring about paper quality and brush bristle stiffness. The cherry blossoms are already falling in the palace courtyard, gathering in gentle drifts like forgotten thoughts. You still copy sutras by day. Still sip cold tea by night. Still sit with your cast letters in the dark, wondering what they're supposed to become now. You keep expecting someone to ask for more. No one does. Not Lord Kim. Not the clerk. Not even a whisper about the project from your fellow scribes, most of whom are more concerned with whether the spring rains will delay the mulberry harvest. You begin to realize something unnerving: your success didn't change the system. It simply confirmed what the system already believed, that it doesn't need to change. Historians still puzzle over this contradiction. Why did a society capable of developing one of the earliest movable metal printing technologies choose not to embrace it? Theories range from economic burden to cultural resistance to sheer bureaucratic inertia. But being here inside it, you understand something deeper. It's not that the kingdom didn't want better tools. It's that it didn't want better tools too soon. There's an unspoken rhythm to tradition. Change can come, but only when wrapped in enough ceremony delay and old-fashioned deference that it doesn't feel like change at all. Metal type too clean, too fast, too ordinary. It didn't feel earned. You don't stop working. Instead, you redirect your curiosity. You begin copying not religious texts, but trade records, legal contracts, grain tallies, the ordinary paperwork that makes kingdoms run quietly in the background. And each time you mark the most frequently used characters, building a mental map of printing priorities. Your personal typeset grows, 20 pieces, then 40, eventually nearly 70. They rattle softly in a drawer like bronze teeth waiting to bite the future. You still cast them by hand, each one a minor miracle of timing and temperature. You've learned how to temper the molds better now, how to chill the clay just enough to prevent cracking, how to balance a piece of fishbone dust in the alloy for a finer finish. These are the kinds of secrets no scroll records. Only practice and burns and persistence. And then one day, a courier comes to your door again. A new order, not from Lord Kim this time, from a junior archive bureau. They want 30 copies of an internal update to inheritance laws. Urgent, within 5 days. Woodblocks, they say, would take too long. They don't tell you how to do it. They just want it done. You smile. You open your drawer. The pages that come out this time are neater, cleaner, the spacing more natural, the layout efficient. By the end of day 3, you're ahead of schedule. You send the stack off, and again, there's no fanfare, no congratulations, just silence. But a different kind, the silence of being trusted. From then on, these small requests start to ripple outward. Quiet, unofficial, but steady. One office needs 3 copies of a new merchant code. A border magistrate wants to reissue updated land deeds. A temple school asks for printed lists of students, not for ceremony, just for record keeping. It's not revolution, it's function. And in Goryeo, where ritual rules everything, function has finally found a crack in the wall. You never tell anyone about your first set of printed edicts. You never publish your diagrams or boast of your method, but you leave marks. A tiny, etched into the margin of each metal-stamped page. No one notices it, not yet. But one day, a bored scribe will run their finger along that mark and wonder who put it there and why. And maybe they'll look beneath their floorboards too. It begins with a whisper, and like most things in Goryeo, it stays that way. You hear it during lunch when 2 low-ranking scribes are huddled over a page, and one of them says, "Funny how fast these new documents are coming out." The other nods, mouth full of rice. Must have hired more carvers. You say nothing, just keep chewing. But inside you feel it, the metal echo. A silent clang in a world built on ink and wood. Your quiet printing efforts have become something else now. Something woven into the everyday bureaucracy of the court. Small orders, minor texts. No proclamations, no sutras, no ceremonial bindings, and yet they multiply. You've trained yourself to work quickly, to cast characters without thinking too hard, to clean and reuse old ones without sentimentality. Your drawers now hold nearly 200 metal types, all sorted in bamboo trays lined with paper scraps. The most used characters are darker from repeated inking. Some are chipped slightly. You learn to read even their flaws. One night you replace 2 broken characters land in text and marvel at the irony. Even your type is becoming political. And then comes a request you didn't expect. A printing job from a temple. Not a royal edict, not a government memo. A monk, an old one from a small hillside shrine near Pyeongju, writes a letter by hand asking if you, the scribe who uses metal, might consider printing a sermon. It's a simple teaching text. Not a sutra. Not a sacred mantra. Just reflections on impermanence and the illusion of permanence. He says his hands shake now. He can no longer carve as he used to. You stare at the letter for a long time. Historians still debate when and how religious institutions in Goryeo began to quietly accept, if not embrace, metal printing. Some claim it was monks like this one remote, aging more practical than purist. Others argue it was born of necessity as temples lost scribes to war or famine. But, the truth is smaller. It's about need. You reply that you'll do it. No cost. You send the monk a sample page printed in your cleanest type. His return note is barely legible, the characters shaky with age. But one sentence shines, "The Dharma is still clear, even if the ink is sharp." You print 20 copies of the sermon. You bind them yourself with rough twine and ship them in a box packed with rice straw. You receive no thanks, no offering, no incense. But weeks later, a junior monk from the same shrine sends you a scribbled poem folded into a sheet of reused paper. Bronze characters whisper truth as clearly as wind in pines. You pin it to your wall. You print another teaching text before they ask. You begin to wonder, what if this is how it spreads? Not through kings or laws, but through need, through shaky hands, through rice-stained letters from temples no one visits anymore. You still work in silence. You don't announce what you do. But your brush gathers dust now. Your inkstone, once polished nightly, sits dry in the corner. Because you have discovered something else. Metal remembers faster than flesh. And though no one will say it aloud, the palace notices. Your assignments increase. So do the unmarked scrolls slipped under your door at dusk. One contains only a list of names. Another a shipping ledger with urgency underlined twice. None are sacred. All are vital. You start assigning each project a code name in your notes. Not for secrecy, just for memory. You call the temple sermons cloud pages. You call the merchant orders threading. And the court edicts, you call them ghost brush. Because they move through the palace like shadows, real effective, untraceable. You dream of them sometimes. Books printed so quickly they forget who made them. Pages traveling farther than your feet ever will. Ideas cast in bronze, pressed in ink, passed from hand to hand like prayer beads made of paper. You no longer ask whether you've changed the world. You just keep printing, because maybe this isn't about revolution at all. Maybe it's about rhythm, a new one, soft, efficient, unseen, like wind through the typeset drawers. Your hands no longer remember the brush. They remember the weight of type, the hiss of molten bronze, the dull clack of tiles sliding into trays. When you sleep, your dreams echo not with chants or verses, but with the sound of presses pressing. You've become something different now. Not a monk, not a scholar. Something in between. A ghost printer. A quiet craftsman working behind the lacquered walls of tradition. And slowly, steadily, the requests grow. Not exponentially, not dramatically, just enough to fill your days. Edicts, sermons, shipping reports, family registries, school rosters. You never sign them. You never leave a trace, but the work itself. Still something nags at you? Why does no one talk about it? You attend a palace council meeting as an observer, just another scholar taking notes. The agenda, improvements to record-keeping methods. You sit in silence as 3 officials discuss parchment quality brush stroke, clarity, and whether the new batch of mulberry paper has too much texture. No one mentions you. No one mentions the metal type. And when someone brings up the idea of increasing printing output for rural schools, another noble waves his fan and says, perhaps we should consider training more carvers. You almost laugh out loud, but you don't, because you finally understand what you are a workaround. A temporary solution. A quiet anomaly tolerated only because it keeps things moving while preserving the illusion that nothing's changed. You're not a herald of a new era. You're the silent patch holding the scroll together. Historians still argue if the metal press truly disappeared from Korean use after the 14th century, or merely slipped into informal circulation. A few scattered documents suggest movable type continued occasionally revived by small temples or obscure government offices, but never formally adopted again at the highest levels. The reasons remain debated. Some say it was internal resistance, others geopolitical instability. Still others suspect the dynasty that followed Joseon had different priorities, different aesthetics, different definitions of what was worth remembering. And yet here you are, still pressing, still casting, still watching your pages move through the court like river mist, never noticed, never acknowledged, but always present, until one day something changes. You receive a package, wrapped in plain cloth, no note, no signature, inside a set of new characters, not your handiwork. Better cast, sharper lines, smoother finish. Whoever made these knows what they're doing, and they're not you. You stare at them for a long time. Then tucked inside the folds of the wrapping, you find a tiny scrap of paper. On it just 2 words, keep going. Your breath catches. You sit for a while in the dark, the characters spread before you like coins from a country no map will ever show. And you realize for the first time you're not alone. Someone else is printing. Someone else is learning to cast, to press, to fold history into pages no one will read aloud, but everyone will use. You don't know who they are, or how they found you. But you do know what to do. You open your drawer. You slide the new type into place beside yours. And for the first time in months, you begin to organize them not by stroke count, but by frequency, by utility, by future use. That night, you light a single candle and start a new page. At the top, you write Index of the Forgotten Press. You begin listing each character, its weight, its casting notes, its quirks. Because now you're no longer just printing. You're building memory, the kind that lasts, the kind that survives silence, the kind that might be found again someday under someone else's floorboard. By summer, the wax in your trays softens too quickly. The beeswax that once held your metal characters neatly in place now sighs under the weight of the heat. You shift your entire operation to the stone storeroom beneath the archive cooler damper, thick with the smell of ink mildew and old scrolls that no one's touched in years. It feels right. Printing in secret beneath the palace, surrounded by the ghost breath of unread edicts. Your collection now exceeds 300 characters. Some of them are elegant, others are chipped. One has a casting bubble that makes the radical for water look vaguely like a startled fish. But they work, and you've begun noticing something remarkable. You're printing faster than ever. You can produce 50 pages in a day with minimal mistakes. You can change layouts in less than an hour. You've even learned how to clean your type more efficiently, soaking them in salt water and brushing with a trimmed boar hair brush for a gleaming finish. Still, no one comes to inspect your work. No one says your name. The orders arrive folded into layers of silk or linen with only a wax seal for context. Sometimes you receive a single phrase, urgent, quiet, internal use, only. Sometimes just a list of addresses. You no longer wait for approval, you just make, and each night after your tasks are done, you write in your ledger. Not the official kind, a personal one. The index of the Forgotten Press has grown into something larger. A chronicle, a how-to, a history of a practice no one acknowledges, but that exists all the same. You've included casting temperatures by alloy, molding techniques that minimize warping, your personal frequency map of 500 characters, cleaning regimens by season, mistakes you've made and what they taught you. You even start leaving blank pages room for someone else to continue the record. You're not sure why, it just feels necessary. Historians still wonder why no centralized manual survived from early Korean metal-type printers. Some believe it was intentional because the practice was politically sensitive. Others think it was practical when only a handful of people could do the work. Why waste time on books? But what if the manuals weren't lost? What if they were buried? What if they were hidden in the places no one thought to look? One night, as rain thuds gently against the archive roof, you pull out the mysterious characters sent to you weeks ago. They're still perfect. Too perfect. They were cast by someone with real skill, perhaps access to better molds, cleaner metal. You inspect them again. One bears a mark on the bottom, a tiny X shaped like a stylized butterfly. You don't recognize it, but it's enough to make your pulse quicken. Whoever this is, they've not only learned to make type, they've started to leave signatures. You take a blank sheet and print a single page using their characters at the top, yours at the bottom, side by side. The difference is slight but noticeable. A reader might not see it, but a printer would. A ghost would. And then you do something new. You fold the page, wrap it in cloth, and send it. No address, just a courier's name and a note for the one who remembers. You pay in coin in silence. 2 weeks pass. Nothing. Then one dusk, a package appears at your door. Inside a set of new characters. Slightly different style. A bit narrower. Alongside them, a short note. Not just memory, multiplication. You're not alone anymore. You sit down hard. Not from fear, from hope. You've never seen the person writing these notes. You don't know how they found you, how they work, what corner of the kingdom they've hollowed out into their own private printing cave. But now you know they're there. Somewhere someone else is casting letters by firelight. Someone else is folding printed pages into history and trusting that silence will carry it farther than applause ever could. You take out your ledger and add a new entry, section the others. You start listing the anonymous characters that arrive. Their marks, their quirks. You don't know if these pieces will ever be read, but you know they deserve to be kept. Because if the court never writes your names down, You'll write each other. The day begins with thunder and ends with discovery. Kaisong's sky has been dark since morning, heavy with rain and court tension. News filters down through palace corridors that the crown prince's advisors are reviewing archival efficiencies, a phrase that makes scribes stiffen and bureaucrats whisper. In Goryeo, when a prince starts asking questions, ink freezes mid-stroke. You retreat underground. Your printing nook has become your sanctuary. No one visits the lower archive vaults anymore except the mice and the memories. It smells like cold paper and bronze dust. You've set up a new rack for type drying and hung your drying pages along the stone walls like wind chimes made of script. But today, something new waits at your door. A box, unmarked, no courier. Inside 50 printed pages, crisp, sharp, perfect spacing, but not yours. You blink. You flip through them. They're excerpts from a Confucian commentary, clearly recent. The layout is unfamiliar. The typeface is thinner, more balanced. At the bottom of the final page, a symbol you've never seen before. A spiral made of tiny dots, like a whirlpool or a slow breath. Historians still argue whether early Korean printers ever networked, if they formed a clandestine circle of artisans, quietly trading type and technique. There are no names, no formal guilds, but small changes in typeface, layout, and metal composition hint at shared ideas, a hidden dialogue across years and miles. You now hold proof. Someone not only knows what you're doing, they've advanced it. You laugh quietly, the kind of laugh you make when the impossible becomes casual. Then reverently, you compare their type to your own. Their characters print softer somehow. Less bite, more breath. You wonder if they're using tin mixed with something lighter. You print a reply. Not words, just numbers. You take their printed characters and respond by printing a line of corresponding index numbers from your ledger. You include one invented glyph, a 3-stroke symbol that means nothing, except to whoever's been watching you this whole time. You send it with no address. Again, just a direction south. And then you wait. 10 days later, a folded reply arrives that the river widens. That's all, but it's enough. You realize what's happening. You're building a language outside of language. A network written not in prose, but in presswork. One symbol at a time. One page at a time. Slow. Silent. Untraceable. But undeniably real. That night, you light your lamp and open your ledger again. You begin a new section. Co-typesetters, marks, and correspondences. You list. Spiral symbol used on Confucian excerpt. Butterfly X early batch, sharper cast unknown origin. Dot triangle arrived once on temple registers, faded ink. You sketch the letter forms. You note the alloy qualities. You describe the spacing style. You're not just cataloging characters anymore. You're building a family of forgotten fingers. The next day, a new order arrives from the Bureau of Ceremonies, reprint the funeral codes for state officials. High profile, sensitive. You consider declining. But then you see a faint mark on the order slip. 3 tiny dots arranged like a rice grain cluster. You smile. Whoever sent it knows. You print the order carefully, respectfully, every page aligned, every character sharp. You slip a blank sheet into the middle of the stack, hidden from casual eyes. On it, the word, here. Just that. When you deliver the pages, the clerk doesn't look twice. You return to your archive vault and sit in the dark for a long time. The storm has passed. The city drips in silence. And under your floorboard, a movement hums quiet, steady, alive. Like type being set. Like memory taking form. Like history whispering to itself in letters no one was meant to read. But someone always would. By autumn, the presses no longer feel like rebellion. They feel like routine. You light your lamp before sunrise now, even when the mornings are warm. The shadows are gentler in the pre-dawn quiet. And you've come to love the moment just before the first page is pressed, when all the type is locked in place and the silence is perfect. Then thump, the world changes. You've stopped counting how many documents you've printed. 1,000 more. They flow out of your hands like water, like breath. Bureau edicts, market announcements, monastic teaching guides, trade manifests for ports you've only read about. And every so often, in the margin of one of these pages, you find a mark that isn't yours. A spiral, a rice cluster, a crescent formed from 3 lines. At first you note them, then you begin replying small print quirks, coded spacing the deliberate misalignment of a comma. A secret handshake written in metal. You don't know how many others are part of this quiet collective now. Maybe 3, maybe 10, maybe more. None of you speak, but all of you print. You recognize each other by breath width differences in stroke weight, by how they handle the tricky characters, by their flourishes on words like piece or grain. You call them in your ledger the silent type. Historians will never record their names. The official histories of Goryeo, compiled with exquisite care and calligraphy, will mention printing woodblock printing that is as a glorious, noble tradition. They will not mention you. They will not mention the archives beneath the archive, or the letters sent with no addresses, or the ghost pages carried by wet-sandaled couriers at dawn. They will not remember the forged type that passed through hands like relics hot from the mold and still holding the warmth of the future. But it happened. You know it, and now others do too. One day you receive a package unlike the others. It contains no pages, no characters, just a single object, a metal ring plain and unpolished. Around the inside edge, 3 words are pressed in miniature print. Not from memory. You hold it for hours. You trace the letters over and over until you've nearly memorized the texture. Not from memory, then what? You realize it's not meant to remember the press. It's meant to carry it forward. The next morning you cast 5 new characters using your best molds, polishing them until they reflect the soft light like water. You print a single page of verse on impermanence, inked in crisp columns signed only with a crescent dot flourish. Then with trembling hands, you wrap it all carefully in cloth and pass it to a traveling merchant heading east. You say only this: deliver this to anyone who still listens. And he nods like this is not the strangest thing he's ever been asked. Historians still argue whether movable metal type ever reached rural Korea in the 14th century, whether it remained an elite experiment or quietly filtered into backroom presses in dusty towns. You've made up your mind. It did, because it had to. You return to your tray. You pick up your brush not to copy, but to label a new compartment in your drawer. The tag reads, for the ones after, you don't know who they are, but you're certain they'll come. Because they always do. They find your marks. They piece together your systems. They recognize the work not as invention, but as inheritance, and then they build their own. One day, long after Kaesong has fallen silent, someone will unearth a tray of bronze characters from the mud beneath a ruined temple wall. They'll wonder who cast them, why they were hidden, and how no one ever recorded their maker. They'll never find your name, but they'll know you were here. The leaves fall differently this year, not because they are redder or drier or more abundant, but because you notice them. Every leaf that drifts past your window seems to echo the motion of paper under press. Gentle, inevitable, wordless but not meaningless. You're older now. Not much, not visibly. But your eyes stay tired even after sleep. Your wrists ache before they move. And the drawers of type that once brought only thrill now bring something gentler reverence. The quiet revolution you helped seed has become an invisible network, a tangle of ink and bronze flowing through the palace, the provinces, maybe even beyond. You no longer recognize every hand that prints, but you do recognize their signatures, the coiling glyphs, the grain stamp margins, the occasional quirky arrangement of punctuation that lets you know. Still here, one afternoon, a courier leaves a packet with no words. Inside, a teaching manual printed in type you've never seen. It's graceful, well-spaced, with characters just slightly taller than yours. At the bottom, a line in tiny print reads, composed and printed in the school at Yeongju Autumn of year 3 of the new count. The school. You sit with that for a long while. Historians still debate whether movable type in Korea ever reached public education. Records are patchy. No official decree was issued. No memorial stone carved. But you know the truth, if it reached a school, it reached the future. You imagine a room where children practice reading not from hand-brushed scrolls, but from printed pages. Identical, durable, accessible. You imagine a teacher pulling fresh sheets from a tray of neatly locked type and handing them to eager hands. No fanfare, no ritual, just learning. You imagine how normal it will feel. That's the secret no one talks about with revolutions. They're not loud. They don't always come with banners or flames. Sometimes they slip in through the side door, put their feet up, and become ordinary. You light your lamp and write a letter. Not to anyone in particular. Just a short message. I have nothing new to teach you, but if you find these drawers, take them. Cast more. Print what you need. Share with no one unless they ask without fear. You sign it with the glyph you invented so long ago, the three-stroke knot. You're a symbol for things that don't end, just change shape. Then you seal it and hide it beneath your tray. You've begun carving again, not out of necessity, but as a reminder. Your hands miss the texture of wood. You create a small plaque, a line from a forgotten poem about type and time pressed into pine, smooth to the touch. You hang it above your workspace. Some tools are borrowed from the future. The next order arrives late, a folded bundle delivered by a boy with wind-reddened cheeks. It's a transcript of a regional debate over land boundary reforms. Nothing sacred, nothing poetic. But it's written clearly, evenly typed, and signed by a name you've never seen. At the bottom, someone has added, set in type from trays copied by trays copied by trays. A printing genealogy. It hits you harder than you expect. You don't cry, not exactly, but your throat tightens. You set the page down and look around your vault. The wax trays, the character drawers, the drying lines, the shelves of folded printings stacked like autumn leaves waiting for wind. You're not alone. You never were. And even when you're gone, this rhythm, this gentle bronze-stamped heartbeat will continue. Maybe one day someone will write about it. Maybe they'll give it a name. Maybe they'll even mistake it for a single invention by a single man. Let them, because the truth was always bigger. The press wasn't invented, it was shared. The first snow arrives without warning. You wake to the silence it brings, the way the world softens under a white sheet. How even the footfalls of servants feel muffled, uncertain, like no one wants to be the first to break the hush. You sit by your window sipping tea gone lukewarm, and watch the rooftops disappear under a slow, steady fall. Down in the archive vault, the air is drier now. Colder. But the smell of ink and metal remains the same. You light the brazier early and pull your sleeves tight before setting to work. Today's print job, an updated merchant regulation for the Han River ferry system. You know the names of these places by heart now. The villages, the routes, the seasonal complaints, ice in winter, swollen banks in summer. You've never traveled to any of them, but your type has. That's the quiet joke between you and your work. Your hands never leave K-Song, but your pages go everywhere. You've begun printing 2 copies of everything, one for the requester, one for your archive. The latter you store in tight bundles, each tied in colored thread, and stacked behind a false panel in the wall. You label them not by date or title, but by feeling. Urgent and wet. Too much copper in the ink. Possible second printer, unknown. Glyph. Half star, one child's prayer. Printed in secret. The archive is becoming something else now. A map, yes, but not of land or law. A map of effort. Of invisible labor. Of hands no one recorded in the annals, but who pressed, set, cleaned, dried, and mailed anyway. You don't know what will happen to it. You don't care. Because for the first time, your work feels complete without recognition. That's a lesson it took years to learn how to create. Not to be seen, but because the world needs what you make, even if it forgets who made it. One morning, the boy courier returns the one who brought you the printed transcript weeks ago. He's older now, voice, deeper eyes, sharper. He bows clumsily and holds out a flat board wrapped in coarse cloth. Inside a full set of 100 characters. Bronze. Clearly cast from a new mold series. And better than yours, cleaner lines balanced, with uniform depth. At the bottom, a single message etched into the tray. We now print for 5 villages. Your designs helped. You run your fingers across the letters. 5 villages. Somewhere out there, people are receiving news prayers, inventories, poetry not carved, not brushed, but pressed. And none of them know your name. Perfect. You write a reply on a sheet of blank paper and fold it into the tray's wrappings. I had help too, from someone who never signed their pages. You send it back with the boy who grins like he knows something he hasn't said yet. Historians still argue whether the Goryeo press movement was an institutional policy or a scattered artisan uprising. Some say it was all coordinated, a slow, secret pilot project for administrative reform. Others insist it was accidental. A few stubborn printers making do with fire and leftover coin metal. You believe the truth is simpler. It was need. Need and a few hands willing to burn their fingers. You add a new entry to your ledger, shared flame year 1, because now it's no longer just you. And you suspect no, it never was. Later that night, as snow muffles the world above, you press one final page for the day. Just a poem. Anonymous. 4 lines about frost and memory and sleep. You don't know who wrote it. You only know that someone else will read it. And when they do, the type will still be warm. The new year arrives with wind-knot drums. In Kaesong, people hang lucky charms outside their doors and tie red ribbons to willow branches, hoping for an early spring. You hang nothing. Your charm is already here in drawers and trays in rows of bronze characters polished to a quiet gleam. You've begun each new year with a ritual of your own, recasting the most worn characters. It's a slow process, deliberate. Meditative even. The symbols most often used, Lantax, river people request they age faster than the rest. Their edges soften, their surfaces dull. They hold the weight of repetition. Like you set aside 3 days just to remake people. It feels symbolic. As you work, you think about how this practice, this unrecorded, unofficial, unsanctioned act of mechanical memory has shaped your life. Years ago, you were a court scribe with ink-stained sleeves and a head full of questions. Now you're something else. A node in a system no map can show, and the system has grown. Courier messages arrive more frequently now, some sealed, some not. One simply says, 2 new printers in Songak. Used your grain glyph as template. They send thanks. Another includes a small pouch of mixed metal powder and a note. Try this alloy for type used in humid temples. The ink doesn't run. It sets beautifully. You update the ledger. Shared flame year 2. New glyph seen inverted crescent inside box. First confirmed female typesetter signature reads, spring-like rain. Alternative drying method using rice husk ash. Estimated active ghost printers 11. You hesitate before writing the last line. 11 others like you scattered across provinces, hills, riverbanks, temple corners. 11 people casting, printing, archiving, delivering. 11 variations of the same stubborn heartbeat. You never meet them, you never write names, but you recognize their type when you see it. There's a kind of familial resemblance in the spacing, in the care. One day you receive a long letter, pages and pages, handwritten this time. Not printed. A slow-moving river of ink. It comes from an elder monk, someone who once carved wood blocks, but whose hands now tremble too much to hold the knife. He thanks you, not for a specific text, but for the existence of the new ones. He says that for the first time in decades, his students chant from identical pages, that they spend less time comparing scribal differences and more time understanding, that when a scroll tears, they can simply reprint it. Bronze does not forget, he writes. It carries Dharma better than we ever could. You cry just a little, because that right there was the point all along. Historians still wrestle with why the movable metal press didn't eclipse woodblock printing in Goryeo. Why it shimmered then dimmed. Some blame tradition. Some point to politics. Some shrug and say, the world wasn't ready, but you no longer care for the theories. You know what happened. It didn't fail. It worked quietly. And now in your twilight years, you print less, but not because you're slowing. You're teaching. 2 apprentices, one from the records office and one from a paper mill outside the city, visit weekly. You show them how to cast without bubbles, how to clean wax, how to recognize when a character needs rest. They call you teacher, but not in public. That's fine. You tell them we don't sign pages. Instead, you teach them the rhythm. Press, peel, dry, stack, repeat. You give them both a copy of the ledger, not the original, but a meticulously typeset replica you spent months preparing. You leave the last few pages blank. Let them fill it. After they leave, you take out a final sheet of rice paper and print a new label for your oldest drawer, Foundry of Forgotten Things. You don't place it on the front. You glue it to the inside of the lid, so that one day when someone opens it without knowing what they're looking for, they'll see that phrase first, and maybe, just maybe, they'll keep going. Sometime later, how much you're not exactly sure, a visitor comes not with a scroll to print, but with a question. She's young, sharp-eyed. She wears her hair high like a court apprentice, but her fingers are stained with ink, not perfume. She bows lightly at your doorway and asks, without preamble, "Is it true? Did we invent it first?" You look at her for a long moment. You think of Jigji, of Choe Yun Ui, of the silent workshops, of trays hidden under floorboards, of the countless pages pressed and sent without a signature, of the others still out there setting type by candlelight and calling it nothing special. You nod. Yes, you say, we did. She exhales and something in her shoulders softens, like the confirmation was less about pride and more about belonging, about permission. You invite her in. She doesn't ask to see the type, she asks to see the ledger. You show it to her. The real one, not the replica. The one with dried ink smudges and accidental T-rings and the corner where you accidentally wrote peace instead of press. You expect her to skim. She doesn't. She reads every word. Hours pass. By the end, she's quiet. Then she says, "May I add to it?" You hesitate. The ledger is full, carefully paged, lovingly maintained. But you remember your own beginning when someone left you characters with a symbol and a note. When you printed that first trembling sheet in secret. When someone else somewhere unseen kept you going. You nod. She takes out a folded sheet of parchment, already prepared. On it, a new typeface. Thinner, more curved. Optimized for smaller paper and faster drying. She's named it Rainstroke. At the bottom, her mark 3 vertical dots over a downward arc. It looks like a falling tear, but also a rising seed. You add a note in the margin, year 4, new glyph, Rainstroke. First confirmed female press architect. She blushes at that, but doesn't erase it. You show her how to prep the trays, how to store characters between layers of oiled cloth, how to tell when beeswax is too old and when bronze has gone brittle. She listens the way only people who have already tried and failed can listen. Later she offers you a page, a small one, printed in her type. It's a poem, not hers, she says, just something old. The bell rings, but no one strikes it. Still the sound travels. You fold it gently and place it inside your robe. Historians still argue how knowledge moves, whether it's written in edicts or whispered across generations, whether the true inventors are those who carve first or those who carry longest. But you've come to believe it's neither. The true inventors are the ones who leave room. You print one last copy of the ledger. Add Rainstroke, add a sketch of her typeface, then leave the final page intentionally blank with nothing but a centered phrase at the top, not the end. You don't say goodbye when she leaves. You just press into her hand a small box of worn characters. The ones you used first. The ones whose grooves no longer print clearly, but whose weight taught you everything. She holds them like they matter, because they do. That night, you sit beside the press. You don't light the lamp, you don't touch the ink. You just listen, and in the quiet you hear it again. Not metal, not wind, just the echo of a bell that no one struck. Still ringing, still traveling. The seasons change again, and with them the rhythm of your printing. Fewer orders now, fewer urgent knocks at the door. The palace has grown distracted with politics, new alliances, new court rituals, a distant rumor about moving the capital. Change is in the air, but not the kind you can press into a page. You don't mind. You've always worked better in the quiet seasons. Your apprentices still visit, though less often now. One has started his own press near the southern ports. The other writes letters from Scylla's old lands, where she's rebuilding a monastery library page by page, teaching monks how to cast letters beside the rice paddies. They both still sign their work with symbols only you would recognize. One evening, a courier arrives with a curious request, a reprint of a reprint. The scroll they bring is a worn, creased version of something you printed years ago. It's faded, smudged, torn at the corners, but still legible, still intact. The courier says it's been through 7 different offices, 2 floods, and 1 accidental fire. It's the only copy that survived. They ask, can you make 20 more? You nod without speaking, fingers tracing the familiar lines of your own long-forgotten work. You open your archive drawer. It's still there. The tray labeled Year 1 Ghost Brush. You still have the type, still know the layout by heart. You don't even need to look at your notes. You clean the characters slowly, reverently. When the first page comes out, crisp, black, perfect, you feel something strange. Not pride, but continuity. The work has lasted. Not because it was glorious, but because it was useful. You complete the set and tie it with care. On the last page, you add a tiny mark, a circle split in half, one side filled, one side hollow. Your own new signature. Historians might miss it, but someone like you will see it one day and know this was made not just again, but still. Later, you begin sorting through your drawers, your ledgers, your bundles of test prints and misprints and margin poems that never made it into any order. You realize you've accumulated too much, so you begin to gift. You wrap up spare type and send it to the Rainstroke printer with a note. These carry my old errors. May they become your new solutions. You give one of your older wax trays to a wandering scholar who speaks often but listens better. You send a blank, unused pressboard to a temple you've only heard of with nothing but a pressed poem at the center. Use if needed, forget if not. Each time you keep no copies, just the memory of having sent something forward. You're not worried about what happens to it all, because by now you know every system wants to forget its quiet builders. That's not failure, that's tradition, but the metal remembers every nick, every cast, every page ever pressed. They are echoes not of you but of work, and that is enough. In the depth of winter you make one last mold. Just one. It's the character for light. You cast it carefully. Trim the flash. Polish the surface until it catches even the smallest spark from your dwindling oil lamp. Then you wrap it in cloth. You don't label it. You just place it in a wooden box and slide it beneath a ledger drawer. Someday someone will find it. They'll lift it in their hand. Feel the smoothness of old bronze. Hold it to the light and wonder why someone went to such trouble for a single word. And they will know somehow, without needing a history book, that word mattered. That work mattered. That you were here, still ringing, still traveling. You don't mark your birthdays anymore. Not because you've forgotten your age, but because time has started to feel different. Less a march, more a spiral. You measure your life now in trays, cast pages, pressed characters worn smooth by repetition. You wake each day not with purpose, but with presence. Outside, Kaesong has changed. The sounds are sharper. The palace gates have been painted again, the colors more vivid than before. New guards walk their posts, younger and less reverent. There's talk of reforms, of records being centralized, of archives being cleaned. You stay silent, because you know what those words mean. Cleaning means discarding what isn't understood. Centralizing means forgetting the side paths. And reform almost always means someone's drawer gets nailed shut. You begin preparing, not in panic, in peace. You take your original trays, your oldest type, and begin recasting select pieces, marking them with a dot on the base to distinguish them. You ink one final copy of the full character set front and back with notes on spacing and alloy content. Then you bind it with string and title it to be used when needed, not before. You hide it in the wall behind the drying rack. You revisit the index of the forgotten press. Its pages are full now. Not just technical details, casting methods, drying times, glyph studies, but stories. Margins filled with your thoughts, your doubts, your small triumphs. You write one last entry. Shared flame, year 5, final. Total characters cast 570. Ghost printers 14, confirmed 3 suspected. Last delivery from Rainstroke printer bound. Confucian verses for traveling school boats. Final signature used circle split glyph. Status of practice, still moving, still invisible, still enough. Then you close the book and wrap it in a black silk cloth. Not for drama, for respect. You don't hide this one. You place it on your work table, in the open, because someone will come. That evening, a letter arrives not by courier, but slipped under your door. The handwriting's unfamiliar. Young, earnest, a little shaky. We found a copy of your grain index in Namhai. It helped us reprint the flood guidelines after our blocks were lost. We didn't know who to thank. Then we found your mark. Thank you. We're still learning. There is no name, just a symbol at the bottom, 3 vertical lines crossing a horizontal wave. You add it to your mental map of makers. You don't respond. You just press one more copy of your instructions for quiet press work, a concise typeset booklet containing your best advice, your hard-won lessons, and one small poem on the last page. Filled with care, forget your name, let the pages hold the flame. You don't send it, you simply set it atop your press. The next morning you sweep your workspace, you oil your trays, you wipe down your type with a cloth you've used since the first print. And then, for the first time in a long time, you let yourself be still. Not to die, not to disappear, just to rest. Because resting is part of rhythm, and your rhythm has always been made not of glory, but of repetition, of making, of remaking, of trusting that the page would carry what the voice could not. The press is quiet now, the drawers are closed, but somewhere across mountains through markets past river bends, your type moves, still pressed, still passed, still traveling. A few weeks pass. Snow returns as it always does, wrapping Kaesong in a white hush that feels less like silence and more like reverence. The palace is quieter than usual and inspection is coming. Officials whisper of consolidating departments, of eliminating redundant processes. You hear the phrase and smile. Redundancy, after all, is the press's secret gift. Copies, multiples, duplicates. You've spent a life making redundant pages so that truth once printed can't be lost. But those in power rarely see it that way. Still, you remain calm, because your work is no longer just here. You know this now. You feel it in the letters you receive from villages you've never visited, in pages printed with glyphs. You didn't teach in the rhythm of words formatted in your old layout, but reshaped, rethought, evolved. The press is no longer yours, and that is its triumph. You spend your days differently now. You organize, you index, you polish and wrap each character mold in oilcloth. You rebind the teaching manuals into smaller bundles, each labeled with a cryptic symbol only a typesetter would understand. Then one day you light a small fire in the courtyard brazier, not to destroy, but to seal. You burn only one thing, your brush. The last one, the same brush you used in the scriptorium years ago when you still believed beauty had to come from the hand. It burns quickly. You watch it curl and blacken, bristles disintegrating into a small pillar of smoke, a tribute to the past you came from, to the path you chose instead. That evening, a knock at your door, not a courier, a child, maybe 12, maybe younger, hair tied back, ink under the fingernails, the same look you once carried, nervous, determined, quiet. They hold out a tightly wrapped bundle. You accept it and motion them inside. The bundle contains 20 printed pages. The characters are uneven, a bit cramped, but consistent. The paper is coarse, the ink slightly overdark, but the intent is there. On the last page, you find your split circle mark, but it's not alone. Beside it, a new glyph, a sprout rising from a shallow tray. You glance at the child. They say barely above a whisper, "We didn't know if it was allowed." You kneel and say the only true rule the press has ever had. If it worked, it was allowed. You hand back the pages, along with a tin box of unused characters you were saving for someday. You label it with a ribbon, not words. The child's eyes light up the way yours once did when you first held a finished cast. And just like that, it begins again. Historians may never know about this moment. They will argue about timelines and inventions about Jikji and Gutenberg and the official narrative. They'll look for signatures in royal records and confirmations in government reports. They won't look here. They won't find the child. They won't find the tin box with the sprout mark. But someone will hold one of those 20 pages someday, in a market, in a school, in a temple's back shelf, and they will read a text not written by hand, but pressed by a tray cast in quiet defiance. They'll never know your name, but they'll read your intention. Because pages remember, type remembers, and though you may never print again, the press has already outlived you. That night you leave the door unlatched. Let whoever needs it find the trays. Let whoever's next carry the rhythm forward. Your work is done, but the flame still lit. There's a strange kind of silence that follows a completed legacy, not the silence of forgetting, the silence of continuity. You move more slowly now. Not from weakness, but from permission. You no longer feel pulled by deadlines, ink pots, or the weight of secrets. Instead, your days unfold like a printed page, structured, deliberate, quietly beautiful. The press still sits in your room. But now it's like an altar. Not used, honored. The drawers stay closed unless someone knocks. and someone always does. They come one at a time, never in groups. A traveler from a coastal port who speaks with salt in her voice and brings a smudged poem she wants to preserve before it's forgotten. A tax clerk from a frontier village who prints land records on mulberry scraps and doesn't mind crooked margins if it means people stop arguing about goats. A monk with blistered hands and a head full of half-remembered sutras hoping to press what he recalls before the memory slips. Each one leaves with something cast and something lit. You give freely, no names exchanged, no records kept. Only the rhythm remains cast ink press peel pass. You realize slowly that this rhythm is what kept it alive all along. Not the metal, not the molds, but the act itself. The act of passing forward. Historians still question why movable metal type faded from records for centuries. Why a world-changing invention would vanish only to reappear elsewhere rebranded, but maybe it never vanished. Maybe it just stopped asking for credit. You spend your evenings writing short entries, phrases meant not to document, but to guide. If the ink smudges, it's because the page was in a hurry. Don't worship the tray, worship the clarity it gives. A broken typepiece teaches more than a perfect one. Only print what someone needs, not what they'll admire. You collect these into a small booklet. Nothing ornate, just a plain cover and 32 half pages. You don't title it. You place a copy in each visitor's hand before they go. Most of them smile. One cries. You write no colophon, no signature, just a symbol in the corner of the final page, the 3-stroke knot. The one you drew in the margin of your first print. The one that means things don't end. They just reshape. Winter returns. Snow again. The same hush you remember from years ago. The brazier warms less than it once did, but your hands have stopped noticing. You begin preparing your last act not as a farewell, but as a closure. You clean the trays. You stack the finished type into sealed boxes wrapped with instructions only another typesetter would understand. You gather the ledgers, all of them. You place them in a wooden chest along with the brush you didn't burn after all. And then with great care you do something you've avoided for decades. You write your name. Not at the front, not on the cover, just on a tiny scrap of paper folded 4 times and slipped into the seam between 2 boards, so that if someone truly wants to know, they can find you, but only if they're willing to search. That night, you sit by the press one last time. You run your fingers along the tray, along the indentations where thousands of characters once pressed their forms into paper in time, and you smile, because you remember what the monk once told you: bronze does not forget, and you believe it, fully. Finally, the first sign of spring is not the plum blossoms. It's the knock on your door. Gentle, hesitant, like someone unsure if they've come to the right place or if such a place could even exist. You open it. The boy on the threshold is soaked from the rain. His sandals are too thin, his sleeves too short, and his eyes too wide. In his hands, a single page, badly smudged, folded so many times it threatens to fall apart. You take it without a word. Unfold it carefully. It's a page from the index of the forgotten press. Not an original. A copy of a copy, faint, cracked, missing half the footnotes. But it's still legible. At the top, your handwriting: if you found this page, then you're already one of us. The boy watches your face. Then he says, I've tried. I burned 3 fingers. The wax keeps sliding. The characters break. You smile, not unkindly. Good, you say. Because anyone who breaks something 3 times and still comes knocking is worth teaching. You usher him inside. The room has changed. More shadows now. Fewer tools on the table. But the warmth of the press, the quiet waiting stillness of it, is exactly as it was. You show him the drawers. Not all at once. One at a time. You explain nothing. He learns by watching, by repeating, by failing. He shouts when the first type holds. You let him. Every press worker shouts once. The second day, he casts his own name. The third day, he prints a proverb his grandmother taught him. The fourth day, he copies your phrase into his notebook. Not for memory. He asks what it means. You say because memory fades. This is for continuity. He nods like he understands. Maybe he does. Maybe he will later. Historians still overlook these transitions. They write about dynasties, not drawers. About proclamations, not presses passed from one hand to another in the soft hush of candlelight. But you understand now, this is the true record. One person arriving soaked, shivering heart full of pages they can't quite form. and leaving with type in their fingers and the rhythm in their spine. You don't tell him what to do next. You only give him a sealed box, small, heavy. Inside 30 characters cast in your earliest years, flawed but functional. He protests. Aren't these yours? You shake your head. They were waiting for you. He leaves on the 5th day. You watch him disappear into the mist, walking quickly, the box pressed to his chest. And then for the first time in a very long time, you exhale. Because you don't need to worry anymore. You don't need to protect the press, or the method, or even the story. It is walking away from you now in every direction, pressed into the hands of people who may never know your name, but who will know how. Time passes in the way only time does, slow then sudden. The days blur into light and ink into the scent of molten metal and damp paper. Your steps grow shorter, your fingers stiffer, but your eyes somehow sharper, not with sight, but with knowing. You know when a casting will crack before it cools. You know which character will be reused next week. You know when a visitor isn't just passing through, but looking to stay. One such visitor arrives just after harvest. She wears the plain robes of a provincial scribe, but carries herself like someone who has stood in front of 1,000 scrolls and asked why this way. She has no letters of introduction, no seal. Just a soft wrapped bundle of type and a single folded note. You unfold it, inside a message. We don't want to replace the brush. We want to remember the hand that held it. You nod slowly. She stays. She doesn't ask to be taught. She finds the empty drawer and begins organizing her type. She scrapes her own wax. She rebalances the pressboard without comment. She leaves no mark but the work. And that's how you know she belongs. She prints quietly, beautifully. Her characters curve just a little more than yours do. She adds breath between lines. She understands spacing like a river understands rocks. She flows around them, never through. One day she hands you a fresh page, a poem. We did not come to build statues. We came to cast silence that would echo. You nod again. That's all she needs. You don't speak often, but your days move in tandem. She begins helping with the ledger, not rewriting, not adding to it, simply copying carefully, reverently, as if preserving not instructions, but prayer. You know what she's doing. She's preparing to carry it. Historians still misread the absence of records as failure. They point to the gaps in chronicles, the lack of court acknowledgement, and say, nothing happened here. But, gaps don't mean silence. They mean hands were too busy pressing to pause and write about it. One evening she asks you something no one else has ever dared. What should I do when you're gone? You smile, because you've been waiting for that question. You tell her, keep going. Cast what they need, not what they admire. Burn nothing unless it lies. Sign nothing unless it helps. And when someone knocks, let them in. Then you add, leave a drawer unmarked. They'll know. That night you prepare a final bundle. Not of type, not a print, just a single page. One you wrote long ago but never printed. You press it gently using her tray layout, not yours. At the top, the shape of remembering. At the bottom, for the first and only time, your full name, folded, sealed, tied with string. You hand it to her the next morning. She doesn't ask what it is. She just nods. You notice as she walks back to her workspace that she's added a new symbol to her glyph, a fourth line tucked beneath the curve. It means rooted. The press hums behind her. Yours, hers, theirs. The silence it casts now is deep, full, ready. You sit by the door, warmed by sunlight and memory. The press has outlived you, and it's only just begun. Your body slows. Not suddenly, no collapse, no tragedy. Just the gentle withdrawal of motion. You rise later. Sit longer. The press calls to you less frequently, not because you've abandoned it, but because it no longer needs you in the way it once did. It's doing just fine on its own. The young woman prints most days now. She no longer asks questions before she acts only after. She's created her own layout system, devised a clever little tray divider for high-use characters. Her typefaces blend yours and hers into something new, slightly more elegant, slightly more curved, slightly more hers. You don't correct her. You just watch the way the light hits her prints when she hangs them to dry. The pages flutter like laundry, like prayer flags, like signals, and still others arrive. Some stay for a day, some for weeks. One stays long enough to build a small traveling press in a lacquer box no larger than a lunch tray. He leaves without saying goodbye, but he carves your circle split glyph into the underside of the handle. You find it weeks later and smile. The rhythm remains. Cast, ink, press, peel, pass. But now you're just one note in the rhythm. Not the beginning, not the center, just part of it. And that's all you ever wanted. One afternoon, you sit by the window with your ledger no longer for writing, just reading. You flip past the early entries. First successful cast using coin metal. Ink bleeding, added ash. Better. Temple request 20 pages, no questions asked. Glyph from the West Circle dot wave. Rainstroke's first poem, still the best one. You laugh at your old notes. So precise, so careful, as if you believed then that the act of printing required control. Now you know better. It requires trust. You reach the final page. Still blank. Not because there's nothing left to say, but because the last page should never belong to the first writer. You close the ledger and tie the string around it one last time. Then, with hands slower than before, but no less sure, you open a box you haven't touched in years. Inside, the very first character you ever cast. It's worn, slightly warped. The corner dented from when you dropped it in the fire. But it still prints. You tested it last year just to be sure. You lift it now, turn it in your fingers. It reads begin. You wrap it in cloth and give it to the young woman without a word. She understands. Of course she does. That night you sit by the brazier and listen to the pages being hung. The drying line creaks. The wax cools in its pot. The air smells like ink and old decisions. You whisper to no one. I was only part of it, and that finally feels like enough. The final morning arrives not as an end, but as an arrival. The sky is pale. Mist drapes low across the palace roofs. The kind of quiet that hums under everything like breath you don't realize you've been holding. You sit at your window as the day wakes up slowly. In the corner, the press stands uncovered. Not in use today, but not idle either. The wax trays are cleaned. The characters are aligned. The room smells of pine brass and ink. The young woman works nearby. No longer your apprentice now, your equal, your successor, your continuation. She hums softly while setting type, the melody unremarkable but steady. You taught her how to cast, but the rhythm that she found herself. You hand her the key to the final drawer. She pauses, then opens it. Inside a new ledger, blank, the same size, the same weight, tied with the same string as yours, except the paper is made from fiber. You never used lighter, stronger weighting. She looks at you, you nod, and that's it. No ceremony, no speech, no final lesson, because everything worth knowing's already in her hands. You stand once more, just once. You place your palm on the edge of the press, the same place your hand always rested before the first impression of the day. The wood remembers you. You can feel it in the grain. Then you walk outside. The morning air is cool, sharp, alive. Birds argue softly from the trees. Far away, a cartwheel rattles over cobblestone. Children laugh, chasing each other around a corner. The world is in motion, as it always has been. But now it moves with your rhythm in it. In scrolls passed hand to hand in tiny villages. In temple sermons read in unison from printed pages. In fairy manifests that no longer need to be guessed. In the hands of those who will never know you, but who will trust the page. You taught the press to echo. And it will, not because of who you were, but because of what you did. You sit beneath the pine tree by the south wall, the same one from long ago when you first asked if the future might be hidden in metal instead of brushstroke. Now you know the answer. It was. And now it's no longer hidden. It moves. It prints. It endures. And you close your eyes. You listen. Not to noise. To the rhythm. To the press. To the silence shaped. And now, dear listener, as the light fades in our story, let your breath settle. You've walked through alleyways of memory, heard the clatter of cast type, touched the edges of forgotten pages still whispering beneath time. The press you followed wasn't just made of metal. It was made of people, of patience, of persistence. Like all great legacies, it left no monument, but many traces. As you close your eyes, imagine a single piece of type, resting warm from the mold. Press gently into the next blank page of history, and know this. The story didn't end. It simply changed hands. Sleep well. The page is still turning.